The combine is officially behind us. That is just another box that we get to now check off as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. But this does feel like a natural time to just provide some updated wide receiver rankings. And while a lot of the guys we care about didn't actually do anything at the combine, we still did get some additional data, some additional numbers that we can obsess over and overreact to that might cause some changes for some people in their wide receiver rankings. So let's talk about our top 5. At number 1, no change for just about anybody, right? It's Tet McMillan. And yes, he didn't do anything at the combine, but he did get measured. So we now know he is 6'4", he is 219 pounds. And look, that's helpful to know. It's good data to have. He is as big as he looks, and he's obviously heavy enough to play at that size. So look, we checked the boxes that we kind of had already passed with the eye test, but it's good to know that information at face value. So why do we like Tet McMillan? Why is he just the guy? I think a clear-cut wide receiver 1 in a tier of his own in this class. He's versatile. He is a dangerous, dynamic playmaker at his size, and that's not easy to find in the NFL, truthfully. Like, that is almost unheard of, or at least it used to be. Nowadays, you see that more and more often. Think, maybe a more dynamic Drake London. Like, that is a realistic outcome. And you guys know how much, if you've watched us, how much I love Drake London. There's a reason I am all in on Tet McMillan. But it's not all positives for Tet McMillan. There's 2 things I think there may be some questions on. One is his overall long speed, right? At his size, he doesn't need to be a burner. But in college, there were some questions about, could he really win deep or be that big play threat all the way down the field? Look, I don't think that's going to be his game. But ultimately, I think it's fine because, again, he can win everywhere else. I don't think it's going to sink Tet McMillan at the next level whatsoever. The next part is just his route running. How proficient of a route runner is he? That's where I'm really looking forward to seeing Matt Harmon's reception perception. Again, if you watch the channel, you know how much I lean on that when it comes to wide receiver just rankings and value, etc. So getting that for Tet McMillan is going to be a huge question because I don't think he is necessarily an elite route runner, but he is a good one. I'm interested to see how close he is to getting to that elite level or if it's in his range of outcomes. But to really just round out the whole picture, look, he is the wide receiver 1 in this class. He is the only guy I think that I'd consider at this spot. But in other classes, I don't think that's the case. I don't think he is a natural wide receiver 1 in every fantasy class last couple of seasons. He's just not. I think it really just speaks to how this class feels as a whole. And we'll talk about that as we get further outside of the top 3 here. Getting over to my wide receiver 2, it is still Luther Burden. Luther Burden did, weigh in, got measured. He ran the 40, which is good to see. And look, comes in 6 feet tall, 206 pounds, runs in the low 4.4s. He has the size, he has the speed. That's what you want to see. Like, you were just hoping Luther Burden didn't magically come in under 200 pounds. Because at 6 feet, look, you don't want him to be that skinny. I think coming in at 206 is a great number to see. That shouldn't concern you. And the speed for his play style, I think, is perfectly fine. Because, look, Luther Burden is a slot wide receiver, or was a slot wide receiver in college. I don't think he has to only be a slot wide receiver in the NFL, right? Slot or flanker is perfectly fine for him. He's not going to be your X. So him not being this big, burly, deep threat is perfectly fine. Like, he doesn't need to be that kind of guy. But when you really look at Luther Burden, there are questions about the profile, right? Like, it's easy to say, he's strong. He's a good route runner in the short and intermediate, dominates out of the slot. All of those things are fun to say. But you have to acknowledge the production shift from year 2 to year 3 for Luther Burden. 2 years ago, he averaged over 20 fantasy points per game in college. He put up over 1,200 yards and was just, on his way to superstardom. I think most people considered him, a challenge to be the wide receiver 1 to Tet McMillan. And then 2024 happens. They have injuries, just not an overly great football team. Once the quarterback kind of goes down and doesn't really get fully healthy again, puts up under 700 yards, 676 to be exact, only 15 fantasy points per game in college. Like, those are not marks that inspire confidence. So you have to really look at this evaluation and say, who do you believe the real Luther Burden is? I think I lean, 2023 version. That is what I believe Luther Burden can be. Now, the one part you really have to pay attention to is over his career, 75% of his catches were targets under 10 yards. And we have to understand or kind of dissect, is that because Mizzou and how they wanted to run their offense, or is that the limitation of his skill set? Look, I don't think that's the case. Like I said already, I think he is more dynamic than just a guy that is in the slot 24/7. If you can get him out of the slot 50% of the time, I think he has a track to be a very good NFL wide receiver and a very good fantasy wide receiver. You've seen that role succeed at the next level. So look, I get it. There's a lot of questions about Luther Burden. For me, he's wide receiver 2. Again, Matt Harmon's perception is going to help solidify this, as will the draft capital when we actually get to the NFL draft. Now, at the wide receiver 3, look, I think this is where the rankings debate actually begins. Most people will have Tet McMillan 1, Luther Burden 2. It's going to be chalky. That's fine. I'm fine to live with the chalk there. Once you get to 3, you have a few guys that people are starting to float around here. For me, it's still Emeka Egbuka. Now, he doesn't do anything at the combine, unfortunately. Fully opts out. He gets measured. He's 6'1", 202. That's not really a big deviation from what he was listed at, so that's perfectly fine. Really, this just comes down to, how do you view the upside of Emeka Egbuka? Because, look, he had a great career in college, goes over 1,000 yards twice. His junior year was disappointing because the offense was just overall disappointing, right? Kyle McCord was abysmal, and that obviously affected everybody on that team. But at no point was he the best wide receiver on his own team. I mean, look, that's tough when you have Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. Like, he was going up against it. He's gone against or been playing with some of the best wide receivers in the NFL, or some of the best wide receiver prospects in the NFL. That is hard to be the best guy. But look, that is a serious question about his ceiling. But when you watch him play, he's a smooth route runner. He is obviously a high IQ player. Could have been a second-round pick if he came out last year in 2023. Chooses to come back. I think kind of gets back on track in the public eye because he goes over 1,000 yards again at Ohio State. So really, it's just like, look, he has a skill set that is not probably conducive to being a fantasy superstar. Landing spot's going to be important because it has to be a team that needs a guy like Emeka Egbuka, a PPR machine potentially that can win in the short, the intermediate, won't have the explosiveness to go deep. I think he profiles as a really, really good wide receiver 2 in the NFL, and honestly a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. He's not your high upside play here, but I think once you get past him, there's a lot of guys that have a lot of question marks, even though they may have more tantalizing upside. So let's just go to wide receiver 4, because it's Tre Harris. That's the obvious name when you want to talk about tantalizing sky high upside. That's what Tre Harris brings. Now, Tre Harris comes in 6'2", 205, runs in the 4.5s for his 40 time, puts up a 9.07 relative athletic score, or RAS. And look, he's big, he's fast, he has the athleticism you need at the next level. If that was where it ended, great. If he was coming out as a junior with the kind of production he's had, with the athleticism, he is a top 10 pick potentially in the NFL. But unfortunately, he's coming out as a 5th-year senior. His first 3 years he spent at Louisiana Tech. Again, playing against lower competition, he puts up over a 30% dominator rating as a junior, but still, wasn't necessarily a high profile, high eval for the NFL. So instead he transfers, goes to Ole Miss, and spends his next 2 seasons there. In those seasons, he doesn't get back over that 30% dominator rating. He doesn't have the same effect on the game against better competition that he did at Louisiana Tech. So basically you have to look at this and say, is he capable of being the focal point of an offense? Look, his skill set, the physical tools say yes. The production didn't necessarily say that with Jackson Dart. So it's kind of, what do you believe? What are you buying into as an eval for this particular type of prospect? Because, look, you look all 5 seasons, he averaged over 3 yards per route run. He's still productive. It's just how productive can he be at the next level? How much of a focal point can he force himself into with whoever ends up taking him? If he gets first-round draft capital and Emeka Egbuka slides to the 2nd, then yeah, Tre Harris goes above and you take the risk. You take the upside that he brings because, again, like I said, the tools give him top 10 upside in fantasy. That's the truth. Like, he could be A.J. Brown. He could be Jonathan Mingo. That's the range. That's the extremes we're talking about with a guy like Tre Harris. So he's at wide receiver 4 for me. He very easily could be wide receiver 3 by the end of draft season. Now, wide receiver 5 is a group of, it feels like 8 people, because I think this wide receiver class just kind of falls off a cliff. And personally, for me, it's not the Texas guys. It's not Marcus Golden. It's not Isaiah Bond. I'm going with Jalen Royals out of Utah State. Now, Jalen Royals didn't test at the combine, but he comes in 6 foot, 205. His season ended, with a season-ending foot injury. So I think it's understandable he's not running at the combine because he's probably not 100% healthy, or at least in combine shape. Now, he's coming out as a senior, so take that for what you will. If you love the idea of early declares, which there is plenty of data to back that up, he is not one. He puts up over 1,000 yards as a junior. Virtually no production, freshman, sophomore year. Didn't matter. Junior puts up over 1,000. His senior year, he was on pace for over 1,400 yards. Like, that kind of production is astounding. And when you watch him play, he does it in 2 different ways. One, as a high IQ, sort of zone beater type wide receiver, because he knows where the defense is going to be or where they should be and where he needs to be. That kind of high IQ play makes you a quarterback's best friend. He is going to be an immediate producer at the next level because it's hard to teach that type of skill set. The mental side of the game is the hardest part to learn for a lot of these guys. The physical tools, they all have it to some degree. He has the mental side on lock. The other way he won was just a yak machine. He is tough to bring down immediately after the catch. He's running before that ball is there. Take that as a positive or a negative, however you want to spin it. But he is always looking for the next step when that ball is getting to him. Through those 7 games that he did end up playing in 2024, he broke 17 tackles. Forced tackles, whatever you want to call them. He was on pace for 29 total forced tackles. The only guy that had more forced missed tackles than that projected 29 was Luther Burden, who had 30. So that's the type of skill set you're talking about. A guy that is going, toe-to-toe with one of the better wide receiver prospects in this class in terms of making guys miss and being just a nightmare to tackle. And again, if you're a yak guy, that usually means you're winning short to intermediate. And that's true with Jalen Royals. He is not a deep threat. He is not this explosive down the field threat that is just going to torch you deep. And that's okay. He can be this X-flanker style guy that, obviously, we talked about, has found a ton of success in the NFL. That archetype works in today's NFL. The draft capital is going to be the big question because, I don't think he's going to be considered in the first. If he gets there somehow, great, but that's a long shot. Realistically, he's a day 2 guy. Round 2, round 3 is where he could thrive. And then landing spot makes all the difference in the world for a player like him, because if you're with a quarterback that's going to take advantage of these high IQ players, that's going to raise the ceiling, especially in PPR leagues. His archetype may be easily found in the NFL draft, but given the skills of the other players around him, I think he could end up being a massive steal for this rookie class.